Trine, yeah, you know, you also introduced yourself yesterday, actually. So I think that most people know you, but it's because, firstly, it's because you have this, as you put it on the first page, this fantastic garden which you've devoted your life, or I'd say half your life, to the last 35 years, but also because you have formulated a lot of things which we all have many times thought and worried and hated and questioned over the many years also as a critic and a curator. So that's why, of course, you've been invited. So thank you for coming. And yeah, I think you're all ready to start, actually.
Okay, thank you, Trevor, and thank you for having me. Originally, I would have held this speech in Danish, but since I made friends with so many English-speaking people, you must bear with me, because I work with language and I like to be very precise. I am not exactly as precise in English as I would love to be. So bear with me, and I'll do it in English just to meet all these needs. So I am a trained artist from the Academy, Fine Arts Academy in Jutland. I always felt not in the right place, not because I didn't love art, because I did, but because I was unfortunate to land in the academy in the 1990s and the zeros, where everyone who dared to say that nature spoke to them was gaslighted and hated and dismissed. And since I spent, before that, 10 years working with art and nature, I felt so lonely and depressed during academy. That's one of the problems that I had to solve later on. The next problem I had was that we were working so much with identity, and the body was the battleground, the last fortress humans had in the modernity. And there was so much theory and text, and unfortunately, teachers who were not very good readers and not equipped to actually teach in the theories that we read. And then we had patriarchy, which was not there, of course, and nobody dared speak about it.
You're just going into a picture.
Okay, okay. Trevor needs to fight just a little bit, as you saw this morning. There has to be a little bit of conflict, then he feels much more at ease. We have to bear with that too. So there was this problem with patriarchy, and which we did not talk about until Me Too, fortunately, came to Denmark after 2 tries. But this is just to say that I felt during my 5 years in academy that there was such an immaturity in psychologically, so much that we did not speak about, and so many patterns and so many primitive defense mechanisms that were at work in all of us, and none of us knew what the heck was going on. And we were constantly involved in all these game playings between the sexes and in the hierarchies, and it really pissed me off. So, going into the academy, I also, see if this will move itself, come on. There we go. I walked into the academy 8 months pregnant, and I had to sign a contract that if I was admitted to the academy, I had to start 3 months later, because there was no maternity leave in 1993 in the academy. That didn't exist. So I said, of course I'll come. So I came and left my 3-month-old infant with his father, which was fine. And then I became the head of the Students' Council. And from then on we had maternity leave at the academy, and then I went home and took care of my child. I also got this house because my partner and father to the child was a designer and graphic artist, and he had a job at Moskva Museum in Momo, and we were given this very old house that belongs to the manor of Moesgaard, and it's from 1855. And as you can see, it was rotten from inside and out. But it was only 1,200 crowns a month, even though that was very moldy. So we moved in, and as soon as I moved into that house, I felt such an urge to grow and to work with plants and soil. And this urge was so irresistible that I would put aside almost everything else in order to cope with that and do that. And I felt that when you have children, you must take the children outside, and you must be with them outside, and you must teach them to have a very close relationship with nature. At that time, I didn't really know where did that come from, because I only gradually, because nature became my spiritual teacher, and because my son very, very much indeed also became my spiritual teacher, I understood that I had left all the teachings that I've gotten from my mother, growing gardens and living in the countrysides. But for like 15 years, I've been more and more involved with urbanity and living in the city and modernity. And I discovered slowly how blank and dull and artificial I have become. And by going back to growing and living with nature and spending so much time just looking at nature, just acknowledging these little insects and finding out that I actually had an elephant in my jungle. That's him. That's this little beetle here. That's my elephant. And knowing that if I would just sit next to this place where the birds go and drink water and bathe, if I would just sit there for a long time, they would start not paying attention to me, and they would sit and bathe and swim right there where I took the picture from. I could not photograph them, because if I was lifting an arm to photograph them, they would fly away. But if I would stay still and just be there, they would be there too. So gradually, I got more and more involved with my place. And the thing is that instead of fighting with nature, trying to suppress its natural ability to grow its own plants, I was looking carefully into what kind of plants actually like to be in this soil. And how can I nourish them, and how can I make this flourish even more and more beautifully? So I worked with cultivated plants and with wild plants, as you see here. So I actually wanted, this is a very curated plant universe you see here, because if I was not constantly taking out nettles, and if I was not constantly taking out all the big scrub, it would grow into nettles and things that was not as beautiful as this. So I would constantly curate by taking out those that were invasive and making the more fragile one blossom. And then have these beautiful meadow-like views in my garden. Here you go. I wanted a garden that no matter where we looked, it had to be beautiful, and it had to be with colors and flowers, all from spring to the fall. And by doing this, I became more and more interested in reading theory about. I read a lot of sociologists. I read a lot of psychology. I crashed a lot of teaching at the university in psychology, and I really wanted to try to make this practice of mine, this is electic practice that I call it, to find my own way in all this. And I have this quote from Giorgio Agamben, who I really love, and I have read a lot of his books, about what it is to be truly contemporary. And I loved it because it really matched with the feeling that I have, that I'm always in some sort of disconnection with the so-called normality that I am embedded in, and which I really dislike a lot. So next to the flowery garden, I have this food garden. And it's I'm just going quickly through this because I actually want to be much more political. So it's just to give you the context and to make you understand that doing this work with the garden and being so intimate with it has been forming my worldview, and it has also been informing me constantly about what we have left and what we have lost, and how far away from actually being in the living world we have moved, and how dangerous it is. So the garden is always, it is starting in a very tidy way, and then in the end of the summer, all the wild things just take over. And it is kind of just renewing itself now, because of all the seeds that I rarely dig in the garden. So this is the kind of scenery I have every fall. And there's so much wild. And you can also see there here, for example, there's a zucchini in the middle. But there are, and there's some kale, palm kale, and another zucchini. And there's also lettuce and stuff in between this. So I've learned to grow in a mass of plants, plants that can be eaten and plants that are just lovely to look at, and that is actually also very good for insects and birds. So one of the persons and thinkers that I really love is Donna Haraway. She has Staying with the Trouble was a very troublesome book for me to read, and I had to read it a couple of times. And I got really annoyed with her, but I really felt that I had to kind of understand her thinking. It was very important for me, and I really hated this concept of the cyborg, because I'm not a very technological minded person. But more and more I have to understand and to accept the fact that we are cyborgs, all of us. I spend so much time with my cell phone, my smartphones. I constantly find myself sitting there tickling its stomach. And I get nervous and anxious when I don't know where it is. And so we are these reassembled postmodern collective and personal selves. I think that's a very, very precise way to put it. And we have to accept that. We are dissembled and reassembled. We are postmodern, of course, and we are collective and personal at the same time. And then she says, this is the self feminists must code. And the preciseness of this is about that feminism is not just for women, of course, you all know that. Men can be feminists as well, as though a lot of men don't understand that. But the collectiveness, the collective self, to acknowledge that we are also collective selves, is key to understanding feminism, in my opinion. And I think Donna Haraway nails it right there. After leaving academy, I created a performance group with Tina Lynge and Grete Aagaard, and we called ourselves Artillery, with a small a, because we knew that we were out in the battleground now with all the male artists and all the power play thing with Klaus Carstensen and Erik A. Fransen and Peter Bunde. And we knew that it was very much harder for women to get acknowledged. But we were working with the so-called relational aesthetics. And we were the first to try the concept of home parties with contemporary art in people's private homes. And the reason why we did that, it was we were asking the question, what the fuck is the visual artist doing in a consumption society where everybody just wants to buy a poster of Van Gogh in IKEA and put it up on their wall, and nobody cared about authenticity anymore. So we created a whole series of authentic little art pieces, multiples they're called, because they can be produced in series, but they are democratic in the sense that they are very cheap, so everybody can afford them. So we had people invite us for home parties, and then we would invade the home of the host, and if the hostess or the host was not too control freaky, we would totally remodel the home with our pieces. And then after people had all the wine and eatings that goes with a home party, they would relax a little bit, and then they would get these gloves on. And then they could start to fiddling and handling these art pieces that were very provocative, because we were constantly talking into we wanted to open the discussion about generosity, care, sharing, and also authenticity. And that was just a way for us to make our way into the homes of somebody who would not go to a gallery. And we did that for 2 years, and we became the pets of all the collectors in Jutland, because they felt that this was a great opportunity for them to show us their collections and their friends their collections. And then they could stockpile these very cheap little art pieces that we sold at the end of a session, so they could use them as hostess presents in the future. And after 2 years of being like Santa Claus's wood workshop and working all the time and earning almost nothing, because it was all materials, we were in this situation. Either we would outsource our production to China and leave all authenticity out of the picture and earn a lot of money, or we would stop the project. And of course we stopped the project. And then we worked with so many other ways to actually engage our audience in what we called aesthetic practices and aesthetic experiences. And one of them was the nature walks. And I want you to just have a close look on this little folder here, which is the Aarhus Samt or municipality. But just look at this, if I can get out of the way. This nature here, what is it? It has nothing to do with nature. So what we did was we were making what we called walking and thinking. So people would sign up for our walks, and they were not allowed to talk at all. They were not allowed to socialize. They were not allowed to do anything but follow us quietly when we went off-piste and far away from the roads that were already there. And they had to bow and crawl and wriggle their way with us through the landscape and say nothing. Just be quiet. And then, according to also what we heard Nikolai saying yesterday, it's all about storytelling, because we also very, very quickly understood in artillery that we could not have people. They would not come if there wasn't anything for them in it to gain. So they had diplomas and they had medals, in the end, with their names on it and our names and Polaroid photographs and everything to put up on their walls, so they could manifest that they actually did this. So here you got a beautiful gold medal after the silent walk, and you also had a glass of champagne, so you could go home with that. Yeah. I myself have had a walking practice since I was a child. I think that distance is only mental. There is absolutely, for me, like 10, 15, 20 kilometers doesn't matter. It's all mental. The same goes with cool and heat. And I have been a cold water swimmer from the beach for 30 years, just going out there, winter and summer, and swimming, and doing the Wim Hof methodology. Some of you may know his breath work, which is really, really impactful. But that has been one other modality that I have taken in, and I feel it's really important to challenge yourself and get to know your body better, and also get to know how this body is actually responding to the environment that you are in. And the ocean is, in Denmark at least, a very, very close environment to us. And I myself have, after being so close with the ocean for so many years, I really feel that I love the ocean. I know it may be sound crazy to you that I say that, and I had experiences in the water where I felt that I was not human anymore, but I was actually some amphibian, a fish or a dolphin. And I had this wish that came very, very clear into my brain, that I just feel repeating it to myself. I want to marry the ocean, which is really crazy, but this is what I felt, and I feel it so often. So I have this huge love to the ocean. And this is why I'm now also fighting very fiercely with the mayor in Aarhus, who wants to enlarge the harbor and ruin a lot of the coast milieu that is very close to the center of Aarhus. So he really hates my guts. So walking and talking, and also having meetings with people in nature. So I also, I have also become a nature psychologist or therapist, and I did that because the more I work with nature, the closer I got, the better I became to actually see and listen and be quiet. The more I understood that this nature, it is working in us constantly. It is what Stephen Porges, who is the scientist behind the polyvagal theory. It's all about the vagus nerve and our nervous system. And he is a top scientist on nerves, and you can see him on YouTube talking about the polyvagal theory. But one of the things that he talks about that is so important for stressed out, anxious modern people is that we need super regulators. And a super regulator is for an infant who's lucky enough to have a well-regulated, psychologically mature first caregiver. Then when the infant is born, the infant cannot regulate itself. It needs the caregiver to help it regulate itself. And the caregiver does that by eye contact and by close proximity to the body, by the heartbeat, by the caregiver's smell that the infant knows. So the mother or the father, in the first place, is a super regulator for the infant and for the child until at least in the first 7 years, when the personality is actually developed. It's really important. And today we have problems that young mothers, they don't look into the eyes of their infants. What do they look into? the eyes of their telephones. And this is a huge problem. And actually, it's a developmental problem for the child psychologically. And the brain development is also jeopardized by this. So nature, for all of us, even those of you who may not know it, nature is a super regulator. So think about it. How many of you post pictures of nature and sunsets on your SoMe profiles? How many of you do that regularly? That's not a lot. Is that a lie, or do you? But I'm sorry to admit that I am also on Facebook, and I'm also but even though I hate it, in Instagram. But I see a lot of pictures of nature, and it's all curated. But we love to see sunsets and sunups. We love to look at the stars. We feel in place when we are walking in a forest. We can breathe. And we feel that we have the right shape and format when we are inside nature. And that is because nature, without, of course, saying anything, is a super regulator that down-regulates our nervous system. And we have to understand that to understand how we are nature and how this electromagnetic field that nature is constantly in synergy with our own bodily electromagnetic field. Yeah, and now Trevor is saying, go on. I've worked with this quote for a long time because, as everybody here is saying, arts has a manifest role to play in these times. And I think Ursula Le Guin puts it very, very precisely here. By saying that we need visionaries and realists of a larger reality. I have been, as a curator, been focused on these topics for a long time. And let's see, I just want... Søren Martensen, that's a comment to yesterday about the landscape, that lady who spoke about from Statens Museum for Kunst, who spoke about her science and how she was working with the landscape painting. But Søren Martensen is actually taking a viewpoint from here where we are, and he also made this fantastic sculpture. Is anyone who would say what the name of it is? It's called a bumblebee. And I think that's a very humoristic way to put it about our culture and how we created this world, that it can hardly fly, but it does, at least still a while. That's from 2018, close to where I live, in the draft. I was very, very moved and very sad about that. And I started to read, and I have to tell this in the end here. I started to read Derek Jensen, who's an American writer and a poet who is living in Oregon. He's fighting very harshly for the wild salmon and for the foresters in Oregon. But he's also teaching creative writing in a couple of universities. He is talking about the capitalist patriarchal society as being driven by violence. And he is constantly showing how this violence is embedded in science, in everywhere, and how it plays out, and telling us to be more and more aware of this inside ourselves and between ourselves. And we have to really, really understand this to get out of the mess that we are in. Next to Derek Jensen, I have been following for some years, and a Canadian doctor and psychologist who's called Gabor Mate. And he talks about this toxic society that we live in, and he has devoted his life to make the world more trauma conscious. because he says traumas because of the violence and the hatred and the contempt that is constantly given from one to the other, from one generation to the other. We are all traumatized. We just don't know it because we think this is the normality that we have to cope with and live in. But that is so wrong. And he just wrote this book, The Myth of Normal, where he and his son is elaborating on the concept of the toxicity in our society and giving very, very, very precise characteristics of what is wrong. So, Trevor says I have to stop. So this is just to show you that there are so many, it's so diverse, the way that people and artists, this is Marianne Jørgensen before the hate was Jes Brink, but there is so much at stake here, and it's from all ends of the spectrum. I wanted to take this in because because I think we also have to acknowledge death here. We have to acknowledge that if we continue the way that we do in 2050, the heat will be so bad on most areas in this planet that everything on the surface will actually burn. And I think some of us might like to quit before that. I'm one of them, and I'm actually writing about the suicide as a possibility. And that has to do with, and now I'm going to end it, but yesterday Bruno Latour, the late Bruno Latour, and Nikolai was talking about the book and asking us to make new stories, political stories, that is actually mimicking the old-fashioned ways of creating politics. And he's the antagonist. And I think they missed a point here, because a lot of the people who are feminists and a lot of the people who can actually not just criticize patriarchy, but also live anti-patriarchy. Who can distinctively do that. They do not want to replicate that kind of language anymore. And I think that's why we are so weary and so not prepared to be fierce in that sense. So I am working for my own, at my own expenses. I'm really trying to be fierce, but not be it, but try to be it in another way. And the way that I'm fierce is that I constantly engage in political debate. I go to meetings. I raise my voice. I fight with the mayor. I fight in the Me Too campaigns, and I fight and I fight and I fight, but I try to do it in a loving and understanding way. And I think that most of us want to do it that way because we are so appalled by the old-fashioned way of making conflicts with everybody. And this is because this system of violence is inside all of us. And I think Bruno Latour and Nikolai they're missing a point here, and they're not listening to the deeper resonance in this movement that is here. Because I think we are here. There is a movement, but we are up against this. James Gustavus Speth, who said this: I used to think the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought with 30 years of good science we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to do that. Here comes art. This is a connection between science and art. And this is, for me, such an evidence that art has a particularly huge role to play, and we have to work with this, but we have to also do it in a new way. Because we cannot just repeat the old ways, because they're so dangerously violent. And we cannot have that, because this will not solve the problem. Marianne Jørgensen uses explosives, and the earth, of course, says, it hurts. It's a Brazilian female artist who made this diva to tell us that the earth in cultural understanding is female. And she also did it to argue with Borsano and his anti-abortion laws in 2019. Bruno Latour also says that change the instruments and you will change the entire social theory. And he says you have to offer arenas where people can gather and share. And I think that all of you in some way are doing that. And I am certainly too. And I really hope that we will continue doing this and continuously using nature and the knowledge that we get and gather from being in nature, and that we continuously will share. I take roadkills and bring them as a feed to a feeding place close to where I live for the carnivores, instead of just having them being smooshed out on the asphalt. Yeah, I just wanted to go to this. Yeah, I quoted Olafur Eliasson yesterday, and I think he's right, but he is also saying he hopes that what we are seeing now, that you are here, that this is only the beginning and not the end or the peak of it, because we still have a very, very long way to go. And I hope you will all go the way, because it's really, really important. Thank you.